Welcome to this presentation on the Regional District of Central Kootenay's Draft Resource Recovery Plan. Less is more, services and solutions for reducing waste. In BC, under the Environmental Management Act, every regional district has to produce a solid waste management plan, called a Resource Recovery Plan in the RDCK. And this plan is a long-term vision of the regional solid waste management system. It considers the 10-year financial and administrative implications of the plan and adopts the pollution prevention hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle, recovery, and residuals management for that garbage that is going to landfill. The RDCK engaged Maura Walker and Associates, my colleague, and myself, Carrie McIver, to work with RDCK staff and the Resource Recovery Plan Advisory Committee, the RPAC, and the Joint Resource Recovery Committee to prepare this plan. The process to update the plan was undertaken in 3 phases. The first phase, which started in 2017, consisted of establishing the RRP Advisory Committee, assessing the existing system, undertaking a community survey to see how the public felt about the system, and preparing a web page on the RRP update. The second phase, in 2018 to 2021, considered options for the future: waste diversion, zero waste, residual waste, policy and regulations, and financing. The second part of phase 2 was to establish tools for community access and input for public consultation, which we are doing right now in phase 3, where we are obtaining community feedback and feedback from local governments on the preferred options. Once this feedback is received, the plan will be modified if required, will be submitted to the board for approval, and upon approval by the board will be submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for final approval. So in the RDCK, the solid waste or the resource recovery system consists of 3 separate and distinct subregions: the West subregion, the Central subregion, and the East subregion. And in all these 3 subregions taken together, there are 3 active landfills, 13 waste transfer stations, 23 recycling depots, and 2 composting facilities that will be constructed this summer. The 5-year trend with respect to operating and capital expenses over the last 5 years is that costs are going up, both capital and operating. And this is due to the introductions of new services, such as recycling depots, as well as meeting regulatory requirements for landfills under the new provincial landfill criteria. Taking a snapshot of 2021, this chart shows the operating in blue, the capital in orange. It's different for each subregion. But I think the important thing to see or to recognize is that the total operating cost, which is really consistent throughout the years, whereas capital can vary, is upwards of $12 million for the system. So this is a large, complex system. Cost recovery is different for each subregion. As you can see in these pie charts, in the West has to recover $4.5 million in 2021, and that is through taxation, tipping fees, grants, borrowing, reserves. The Central subregion has a much larger cost recovery in 2021 due to capital projects. So you can see there taxation, tipping fees, grants for the composting facilities, borrowing, and reserves. Reserves have been built up to pay for the capital projects anticipated. And in the East subregion, similarly, there is taxation, tipping fees, borrowing, and reserves. So the system has a very significant staffing requirement. There are 7 managerial, technical, or supervisory positions, looking after 83 operating positions. In 2020, the system disposed of 31,097 tons, which equates to a disposal rate of 490 kilograms per capita. On the right, the pie chart indicates the composition of that waste that was disposed. And what is important is what went into the landfill, 37% was still recyclable and 40% was compostable. And the largest component is food waste at 26%. So to get an idea of how the RDCK is performing against other regional districts, in BC, every regional district has to report their disposal rate to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change annually. The most recent data we have is for 2018. And this chart shows the provincial average in 2018 was 505 kilograms per capita. The RDCK was at 469. But the provincial long-term target is an average of 350 kilograms per capita, which will be achieved through each regional district doing their best. And you can see in this chart that while the RDCK was below the provincial average, there are a number of other regional districts that are doing much better and getting closer to a 350 target. So the point is the RDCK can do better. So what are the key issues addressed in this plan update? The first is that food waste is the largest component of the waste stream going to landfill at 26%. Only 42% of households have curbside collection. The recycling depot system is not well funded by Recycle BC. The resource recovery system is complex and expensive with many moving parts. And cost recovery needs to be fair and equitable while incentivizing diversion. So what are the strategies and actions contained in this plan update? 3 main strategies: zero waste, reducing what we send to landfill; residual waste management, securing landfill capacity for the long term and meeting regulatory requirements; and financial and administrative, supporting the actions in the plan. The first strategy relating to zero waste, the path to zero waste, consists of events and campaigns that encourage waste reduction and reuse, with some new operating funding of $5,000 a year and new staffing of 0.3 FTEs. And I just want to note that these dollars are for the entire system, all 3 subregions. They're not per subregion. The second set of actions is organic waste diversion to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and save landfill capacity. There's new capital under this of $6.3 million and new operating of $528,500 with 3 permanent FTEs and 2 term FTEs. The third is to increase participation in recycling by residents with no new costs. So to pause for a minute to just talk about optimizing organic diversion and expanding curbside collection. When organics decompose in a landfill, it's under anaerobic conditions, no oxygen. And under those conditions, the organics create methane. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, 21 times stronger than carbon dioxide. So if the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then one of the easiest ways to do it is to divert organic waste from landfills, to optimize organic diversion. Now, what I said earlier, though, is less than 50% of households have curbside collection. And without curbside collection, you will not be optimizing diversion. The Creston Food Waste Composting Facility will be constructed this summer at $1.3 million. In Salmo Food Waste Composting Facility at $2.3 million. And Creston, Nelson, and Castlegar have committed to introducing curbside collection in 2022. But what the map on the right shows is that if that curbside collection is expanded to households outside of municipal boundaries, the actual recovery can be increased significantly. You could have 80% of households having garbage and organics collection. And curbside collection has the highest recovery rate, much higher than a drop-off. So the RDCK engaged us to do a feasibility study last year to look at, could this work? And this map shows the areas where potentially curbside collection could be expanded. And if that happens, it would improve convenience, reduce costs, increase diversion, reduce the environmental footprint, and ease pressure on landfill. The fourth set of actions under the Path to Zero Waste is to encourage our businesses and institutions to maximize their participation in recycling and waste reduction. There are no new costs associated with these actions. The fifth is to encourage and support the diversion and highest end use of construction, demolition, and renovation waste. There are some new operating costs of $5,000 a year and new staff, 0.1 FTE for 1 year. The sixth set of actions is to encourage broad availability of extended producer responsibility programs in the RDCK and support expansion of EPR programs, and there's no new cost there. The seventh set of actions is to support the establishment of a circular economy, no new costs, and the eighth is to continue education and outreach with some new operating of $10,000 a year and new staffing at 0.2 FTE. The second strategy deals with managing residual waste, which is transfer stations and landfills. The Creston landfill has a 30-year lifespan, and its continued use will be dependent on provincial approval, and there'll be some additional land required for a buffer. In the central sub-region, there are no landfills to deal with, unlike Nakusp, which is closing, Utashinia, which will become the regional landfill and will be expanded. But what there is in the central sub-region is the closing of historic sites. And some of these sites need additional closure to ensure long-term protection of the environment, and these sites will be assessed in the next few years, and then final closure. So for the central sub-region, the estimated costs for landfills and transfer stations, we have capital, there's heated storage for compacting trailers, Nelson landfill closure works, and then the proposed legacy landfill closure works for historic landfills at Balfour, Caslow, Marblehead, and Salmo at $4 million. It's an estimate of $1 million each, not sure yet. The plans, which you can see down there at $450,000, will then identify what the costs will be. Another strategy regarding residual waste is hazardous materials assessments for demolition and renovation projects. There is now a greater awareness of the potential for exposure to hazardous materials, such as asbestos, from demolition and renovation projects. And to ensure safety, it's recommended that a hazardous materials assessment be required prior to disposal of demolition and renovation waste at RDCK facilities. Another component relates to working with the community to reduce illegal dumping, to lobby the province to do more about responding to reports of illegal dumping and enforcing illegal dumping, develop a regional interagency illegal dumping strategy, ongoing cleanup of problem sites, support community-based initiatives, and establish a reporting mechanism. The costs here would be $1,000 a year and new staffing of 0.1 to 0.025 FTE. With respect to finance and administration, for the central sub-region, this chart shows the 10-year financial plan. As you know, local governments in BC have to prepare 5-year financial plans. RDCK staff have taken the 5-year plan and extended it out for capital and operating for 10 years. The blue bars are the estimated expenditures, including the new expenditures in the resource recovery plan, and the orange bars are the current revenue as approved in the 5-year financial plan. The importance of doing this is to identify the gaps so that you can know ahead of time that you're going to either have to, for capital projects, build reserves or try to get grants or borrow, and for operating to potentially raise tipping fees or raise taxes. The table on the right shows the most important thing here is the operating increase, because as I said, with capital, you can typically build reserves, you can borrow, or you can get grants. But for operating, it is generally taxes or tipping fees. And over the 10-year period in the central subregion, the increase in operating is relatively modest until we get to the final 3 years. 4.8% in 2028, 5% in 2029, and 4.5% in 2030. So that means that for those years, there'll need to be some planning ahead of time for what the taxes and tipping fees will be. The same exercise has been done for the West, and the West has much higher increase in operating expenditures, and the West subregion will have to determine how they're going to fund that. The East subregion as well is more like the Central, very modest increases until the end of the 10-year period. But the East subregion, as well as the Central and West, will have to look at whether to raise taxes, to raise tipping fees, or find cost efficiencies. So this third strategy in the plan relates to financial sustainability, and it looks at considering an alternative administrative model for the resource recovery system, undertaking a system efficiency study and identifying options to improve cost effectiveness and equitability, reviewing the subsidization of waste diversion services at resource recovery facilities, and finally implement asset management plans at resource recovery facilities. What will happen with these new strategies and actions? A new disposal target has been established to reduce waste disposal by 28%. The new goal is to go from 490 kilograms per capita in 2020 to 360 kilograms per capita in 2030 through reduction and reuse, through organic waste diversion, through residential recycling, through industrial, commercial, institutional, EPR, and household hazardous waste diversion, through construction, demolition, and renovation diversion, and finally through supporting a circular economy. Thank you.